Hello, friends. Welcome back to Undercurrents. I'm your host, Ken Ogasawara. This episode is the second and final part of a special two-part series featuring highlights from a live event that our Indigenous Neighbours team held with three non-Indigenous Christian panelists who shared their very different journeys into relationship with Indigenous communities and neighbours. But first, a word from our sponsor. Undercurrents is brought to you in part by Kindred Credit Union. Kindred is all about helping you make peace with your money through real human advice and by using money as a force for good in your community. And continuing in the spirit of today's conversation, Kindred is committed to doing their own learning, building partnerships, and mobilizing their resources to make tangible progress towards reconciliation. Go to kindredcu.com to open an account today. If you haven't already listened to part one of this two-parter, I recommend you have a listen to that first, as it gives some good context for what you'll hear in this episode. But to catch you up, we heard from three unique panelists who have come to this work in very different ways. Karen Ward has been working in the North in Indigenous communities for over 20 years. Dr. Samuel Sarpiya, whose path to confronting colonialism in his native Nigeria, eventually led him to learning more about First Peoples in his new home in Canada. And Doug McLachlin, whose work as a geotechnical engineer made him realize the importance for meaningful partnership with First Nations, on whose land all our infrastructure projects are built. In the previous episode, my colleague Scott Morton-Ninomiya, MCC's Indigenous Neighbours Program Coordinator, asked the panels two sets of questions. What did they know about First Nations in Canada growing up? And what learning experience did they have that really jump-started their learning and shifting of perspective? The second question was, how did they shift their mindset about Indigenous peoples as a problem to solve toward a mindset of good neighborliness? And importantly, as Indigenous writer Patty Krawick says, how do we become the kind of neighbor that First Peoples want to be in relationship with? In this episode, we'll ask our panelists a final question, which pivots off the last one. Why is it important for the church to do the same thing? To go from that charity or evangelism mindset to a nation-to-nation or neighbor-to-neighbor approach? Samuel starts us off with some challenging truths that Christians need to acknowledge.
I think listening to the stories of our Indigenous brothers and sisters and the horror that happened in the name of Jesus. Underline that word. All of this, most of the horror that we hear from the stories of residential school did not happen in the name of the state. It happened in the name of Jesus. Just that understanding is a game changer. So if we understand that, it enables us to realize that the name of Jesus has two connotations. It is either taken from a very toxic point of view, as that's the reason for my trauma, or that's the reason that I'm abandoning my own heritage and traditions. I am privileged to be in a community, to work in a community that I've been to multiple communities, and Mishkigogaman is just one of the many communities that I've been to. One of the things that I'm learning is, please don't come to us with material things and give us a Bible. The Bible, God already existed here before the Bible. And I was privileged to hear from a chief who said to a church community that has been coming to their community every Christmas and bring Christmas gift and bring all kinds of things, including a Bible. So that means all the kids in the elementary school for the last 8 years, they've received 8 Bibles. How many of you have received a gift of 8 Bibles in the last 8 years? Probably none. But somehow the church that continues to do these things, that the more Bible we give to this community, the more it will change. And this chief in the community said, just tell them we're not looking for more Bibles. We want relationship. We want partnership of equals. And I think the challenge for us as evangelicals or Christians is to pay attention that we're not there because we want to proselytize. Yes, St. Francis of Assisi said, preach the gospel if necessary, use words. That means relationship. So the invitation is for us not to have the Christus Victus mentality, but to be allies. And when we do that, we will be amazed at the radical transformation that we will see God does through our simple act of obedience.
This question really makes my heart pump. So, I think I should just explain a little bit more about what I do now. And so I run this organization called Burning Stone Ministries, and it came out of my relationship with that community who, once the children's program became too much for this old person to be sleeping on the floor of the school for 4 weeks of the month of the summer, passed it on and thought I was done. But the woman who was chief at the time said, "Oh no, Christian, I call myself a follower of Jesus because Christian has the negative context up there. And the traditional people really want to continue a relationship with you, not just the Christian people. So you need to come back here." And I had just been hanging out with a friend who developed a program called Brave Girls for to be run in churches to help young girls from the age of 14 and up to learn to become leaders, particularly in a world, in a society where usually around the age of 13 or 14, young girls lose all their confidence and base their identity on fake things, especially in the world of social media. So I brought the chief and her 2 daughters to a weekend where we were doing that, and she said, "Karen, we need this up in Mish." And I knew that that was right, but it needed to be changed. It needed to be more trauma-informed and Indigenous relevant. So I took the time to take all of that curriculum that my friend Ellen had written and tried to rewrite it from what I had known from my last 11 years in Mish. And so I said to Chief Connie Gray McKay, "I will make it happen." The girls that have been in and boys now that have been in these programs are saying, "Well, Karen, we want more of this program." And they can't go to high school in their community. They have to leave to go to high school. And so I decided that I would bring some of these kids that I've known since they were 5 years old and let them come to school, live in our house, and we would help them do life and walk alongside them. Should everyone do that? No, it's quite the job, but it is a way of building relationship. First, you have to recognize that this is not just another mission to be involved in. This is not just another thing that's out there. This is a Canadian problem that we are all part of because we are all treaty people. This is a perspective change, and for some of us, a theological change. We have to understand what being treaty people means, especially as followers of Jesus. We have to be willing to learn, and there's a lot to learn. This is a deep well, and it's controversial. I actually heard an U.S. pastor of a megachurch yesterday saying something about how he disagrees with anyone saying we're on stolen land. We conquered it. Get over it. It's such a wrong theology. But as treaty people, and treaties were believed by the Indigenous people to be a partnership, but the treaties were broken because our government wanted everything, wanted the land, wanted to make money, and believe it, we're still living in that system. And that has to be broken down. We will look as followers of Jesus to be unworldly when we go that route. I'm just going to throw one last thing out from the idea of being a neighbor. When we were at the beginning treaty people, the Indigenous people saw us as relatives. And that's actually the relationship they would like to go back to. That's even bigger than just being a neighbor.
Neighbors, friends, even relatives, these are profound relationships we're talking about. But you can't just jump right into a deep, trusting relationship. especially with the trauma that the church has inflicted on First Peoples, as Samuel pointed out. So where does one begin on a practical level to start these relationships? This question came up in the Q&A.
I think one of the questions here is, how best to handle the overwhelm and where to start in a community. So these are all basically one of the ideas here is that we get it, like we need a relationship here. How do we start? Like you can't just bump into an Indigenous person on the street and say, I love you. Or like, did you know that we're already in a relationship? Like these are not good ways to get started. Not good ways to get started. But what are some good ways to get started? And I have a couple ideas. But does anybody have any ideas off the top of your head?
In my case, I would say every time there was an opportunity to learn in my company about how we can work on reconciliation or how we can involve students in the Indigenous communities in our company, I'd say, okay, I'll sign up for that. I'll do that. So I think even today, some of the books that were mentioned, I'm going to ask for a reading list and find out more. It's interesting, for the land-based cultural awareness training, we had homework. Some of that was read the call to action. Murray Sinclair was the chair. And it's interesting, I looked at him and what he said. He asked these 4 questions. Why am I here? Where am I going? Who am I? He asked the same questions everybody does. It's partnership. It's teaming together, working together. I've heard it said, we were wounded in community. We are healed in community, in a loving, caring, safe community. And so we can't do it alone. If you're trying to do it alone, I think it'll be very frustrating. But talk, share. Even the fact that you're here, many people heard about this event and didn't come, but you're here. That's the next step.
I can tell you, 20 years ago, Jeff and I would have never in a million years assumed we'd be doing what we're doing. And yes, I had to change. I had to learn how to swim after I'd been thrown in the deep end. You guys are, in a way, being started at the shallow end to get in. Don't just assume that the first thing you need to do when you leave here is go find an Indigenous person to get to know. Leave this in God's hands and pray. There's 2 things that I believe you need to pray about, because I can tell you from experience, and this has again been a learning thing for me, because I was brought up in a tradition that I believe taught, what I got out of it was that the enemy was just this little red thing that was going to bug me my whole life, but I was pretty well protected and okay. So going to a place where the enemy wants people oppressed and kept down and has a good foothold, this is not something I can solve. But God says, through prayer, things can change. And I'm speaking to myself because I'm a terrible rememberer to pray. But even to have all of the churches that want to get involved in knowing what it means to be a good neighbor or relative, start with praying for our land, for our relationships, and for truth, and to shut down the enemy. All that to say, all of what we're doing right now, having these questions, reading, getting information, and praying will prepare you for that special sacred time that God is going to put you in a position to develop a relationship. And it may be in big community or it may be individual one-on-one.
My colleague Mim Harder, who you heard open the event with the Thanksgiving address in the last episode, shares an important lesson that a church youth group learned when they wanted to leap into action in forming a relationship with a remote First Nation.
So back before COVID, I met a lady who had come from Singapore. She is a social justice warrior, and so she started a youth group, no church affiliation, just simply a group of youth that was interested in social justice. They're about 9 to 16 years old. And I guess it was something they had learned in school, and they decided they wanted to learn more about the first people of this land. So one day she called and she said, Mim, the youth want to do something, and they have all these ideas what they could do for a flying community in Northern Ontario. And I just sat there and listened. She started listing all these things off. I'm like, that's great. Did you ask them what they want? You could hear a pin drop. No. I said, you need to contact the band council and the chief, and you need to find out what they want. Those are great ideas, but that maybe not what's so important for them. So these youth got together, they wrote a letter to band council, they sent it up, and they said, we're a group of youth. We would like to do something for you that you need. What would you like us to do? No cost to you. Well, the answer came back even I was not prepared for. We need LED light bulbs because hydro is expensive. I wouldn't have thought of that. So these youth went out and banged on business doors and on house doors and everywhere else that they could think of. And they raised enough money to send 1,000 LED light bulbs up to Abbotsford, which is Fort Hope in Northern Ontario's a fly-in community. And that they have still lasting relationships with that community.
Yeah, I would just add a couple of quick things to this, and then I want to get to another question. One is, I agree with what's been set up here, the asking people what they want. I think just showing up in terms of like connecting very close, like not even going to Northern Ontario. We have a next steps piece that we're going to be talking about later that has some ideas that I think is on your tables already. There's a lot of like in our work, we can't even keep up with all the things that Indigenous leaders and organizations are doing. So and we can certainly help, and others on the stage can help figure out who's doing what and who's asking for help, how you can plug in. One of the things that I've found really helpful is just showing up. And I've heard people say sometimes like, I really wanted to help and I emailed this organization and they never got back to me. And there's kind of, a bit of upset there. Like, why didn't they just call me back or email me back? And it's like, well, because they were like ludicrously busy trying to take care of all these other things. And they didn't know if you were a neighbor they'd want to build a relationship with. So there's a lot of risk in somebody at an Indigenous organization just connecting with a random white guy because they don't know what they're going to get. I've been told this by so many people, like, just show up and keep showing up. The little story that I have is I showed up at a ceremony at Crowshield Lodge and I just stood there and was hanging out. And then somebody came along and said, that elder needs a place to sit. Take this hay bale over to them. And I was like, okay, here I go. Like, you just stand around and wait for someone and sometimes it's that simple. You just show up and then somebody will tell you, like, here's what's needed. And then you just do it. You don't have to come up with all the solutions. So, that's what I would say. Next question that we have is there a way for us to become more personally in tune and connected with nature? And how can that help us become better neighbors relations with Indigenous people? Connected to this, I think, is can we hear more about what it means to be treaty people?
I don't know if you guys know this song, but we used to sing, "This world is not my home, I'm just a passing through." That is a theology that says, I don't have to take care of this land. So even in our minds, our recycling and care of garbage and all of that stuff is, as Ray would call it, sacred. We need to consider that. And we need to see this land as a gift from God. Just having those mindset changes will bring things to you on your own. You have to start to have a mindset change, and even just that one little thing can change things. There are many Indigenous leaders that believe that climate change is something we should all be involved in.
We need to get out. and spend time just reflecting and thanking God for his creation. It is so beautiful. So I think it's an inward journey, an outward journey. There's so many aspects to how to be a better neighbor. And we even had a Father Heart event here in this place. If we know God is our Father, or Mother Heart, Father Heart of God, we behave as his children. Somebody who has a heart of sonship or daughtership will say, God made all of this. It's all of ours to share. I can easily give you something because God is providing everything for me. So I think being a good neighbor is having an attitude of, we are all here sharing Turtle Island. And I talked with one of my colleagues who's Indigenous. I said, let's not talk politics. Let's talk Turtle Island. There's only one Turtle Island, and we're all on this together. So having that inward journey as well as an outward journey, I think is important.
Yeah. I think just another reminder, it's sort of a reminder to pay attention that there are 49 just within the Anishinaabe nations, there are 49 different nations. So let's not paint all things Indigenous with one broad brush, because we have that tendency, I get out of this workshop, now I am an Indigenous expert. You'll be surprised to find out that out of those 49 different nations, they have different practices and different ways of building relationships.
Finally, two young people from Mishki-Gogamang First Nation and participants in Karen's organization, Burning Stone Ministries, shared a few words of appreciation at the end. Here's Naya and Claudia, with help from Karen's daughter, Jennifer. Karen has known Naya and Claudia since they were little girls. They're now attending college.
Hi, everyone. We just want to say a huge, heartfelt thank you to everyone who showed up ready to listen, learn, and grow in how you love and walk alongside your Indigenous neighbors. The fact that you took time out of your lives to be here, means more to us than we can fully put into words.
Sometimes it can feel scary to step into conversations about history, culture, and reconciliation. But we trust you came with open minds, open hearts, and a willingness to really hear their stories. That kind of courage and humility creates space for healing, for honesty, and for real relationships to begin. Your presence reminded us that change doesn't only happen in big dramatic ways. It happens when everyday people choose to listen deeply, ask thoughtful questions, and care about one another's experiences. Every smile, every conversation, and every moment of connection mattered. You made us feel seen, respected, and hopeful for what the future can look like when we walk together.
We hope you leave feeling inspired, challenged in good ways, and encouraged to keep learning and building genuine friendship and with Indigenous people in your own communities. Reconciliation isn't just one event, it's a journey we take together step by step. And you took an important step just by being there. Thank you for your kindness, your openness, and your willingness to grow with us. We are truly grateful for you and for your beautiful community that's built through moments like this. Miigwech.
Thank you, Naya and Claudia. I can't say it any more graciously, lovingly, and gratefully than that. And I also can't emphasize enough the importance for those of us who are non-Indigenous followers of Jesus to enter this work carefully, thoughtfully, and with humble hearts, closed mouths, and wide open ears. My colleague Fiona provided a list of resources at this event, which I will share with you in the show notes and on our website, so you can take tangible next steps in learning, listening, and showing up in a good way. As we've been trying out this season, here are 3 levels of change and learning that hopefully were tweaked for you as you listened. The first is change perspective. Was there anything in the conversation that surprised you or challenged you? For me, it was the stark reminder from Samuel that for so many First Peoples in Canada, what came to them in the name of Christ was not love or grace, but trauma and pain. How can Christians grapple with this legacy? If you want to hear a powerful story of a changed perspective, you can listen back to episode 7 called Merle's Story, a testimony from a former volunteer at a Mennonite-run residential school in Poplar Hill, Ontario. The second layer of change is in changed relationships. How does your changed perspective now change your relationships? Did you hear any examples of changed relationships in this episode? Maybe start with how do you even enter into a relationship, either at the individual or community level. Finally, the third layer is changed systems. This is the biggest boulder to move, but most impactful. This system can be federal or provincial or municipal policies. It could also be your workplace or church. Where can you advocate for systemic change so that relationships with Indigenous peoples can happen and be trusting and authentic ones? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Also, we have a discussion guide with every episode, so you can have a small group discussion and dig into this work in a meaningful way with others in your community. Thank you to panelists Karen Ward, Dr. Samuel Sarpiya, and Doug McLachlin, and my colleagues Scott Morton-Inomia, Mim Harder, and Fiona Lee. Special thanks to Myrtle Wong, who was the driving force behind this event, and Pastor Mark Wall for hosting us. As always, please subscribe, review, and share with your friends. That really helps people find us so that we can keep telling these stories. Huge thank you to Kindred for supporting Undercurrents, and this episode was produced with help from Kristen Kong, theme music by Brian McMillan, logo by Jesse Bergen, and executive produced by Sandra Reimer. My name is Ken Ogasawara. Have a great rest of your day.